In fact, once he is motivated, no one can change more completely than the man who has been at the bottom. I call myself the best example of that. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. We, today, are Nasreen and Ramia. Nasreen Abdelmajid, our technical producer for the show, and Ramia Amudin, one of the hosts. Jacob Szymanski is away this week. But Niz, we're holding down the fort because it's a throwback to old times when it was just you and I. It was very
the good old days.
The good old days. Yeah,
No, I'm
exactly. Now, we launched this show together, and it was a heck of a season when we started with community members, joining us on the show to talk audiobooks. And
this is when we started branding ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Without the two of us, there is no show. Oh, and Andy Frank, of course, because he helped us actually put this thing together. But it's definitely a week for us to talk about different things. I'm in the middle of a read that I'm going to be telling you about today. Also, we're going to get a community member on, Karoline Bourdeau, and Karoline's going to tell us about 5 different books, and you know what that means. It means rapid fire review. So that's going to be interesting as well. That's in the second half of the show, and she's got a variety for us, by the way. Sometimes we get people who choose books that are all kind of in the same realm of things, same thematically, potentially just genre seems to be a thread. But Karoline purposefully chose 5 books that are nothing like one another. So we'll see how many we get to, and I'm very curious just based on the titles. She's got a reputation for this, recommending books with interesting, intriguing titles, and looking forward to chatting with her because, again, it's a throwback. She first joined us back in season 1 of the show. Nasreen, before we go any further, let's look at the CELA homepage. We visit the Center for Equitable Library Access in 2 ways on the show. Number 1, every week we give you a preview of what they have on their site, a glance at their 3 featured titles that you can find at celalibrary.ca. But also, once a month we check in with our friends from CELA, and they join us on the show for incredible conversation about anything and everything literary. Mm-hmm. So that is our check-in, usually at the start of the month, with Karen McKay and Teresa Power from the Center for Equitable Library Access. You can go into the archives and check out lots of convos with them. Last time we talked about literary awards and whether or not they're relevant these days, and some of the publishing behind them and such. Okay, Niz, what are the 3 featured titles that are currently up on CELA.ca?
Yeah, so we're looking at the featured titles, and the first one is called The Fury by Alex Michaelides. It's a suspense and thrillers. The second one's Unbroken by Angela Sterritt. It's an Indigenous Peoples in Canada Canadian biography. And the third is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, serious and literary fiction.
Thank you. And of course, those titles, as I said, well, I may have wrongly said CELA.ca. CELAlibrary.ca is where you can go for those titles. So, Niz, I've been indulging in a book for the last 2 weeks. And the quote of the day is from this book as well, but there's so many quotable moments. And it is the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And Malcolm X was a Muslim American minister for the longest time. I mean, you may know him as, or to be, a lot of other things because of his story being so huge and so well known, and parts of a lot of other people's stories like Muhammad Ali. But he wrote this book, most of it, with the collaboration of Alex Haley, who's a journalist, American journalist. And I haven't, truthfully, I just want to put this out there now, I haven't gotten to the end of the book yet, so I'm not sure what the part is of Alex Haley or when he was unable to stop writing this book. I am just taking his story and the book with stride. I didn't do too much pre-research going into it, but I wanted to talk about it just because it is 18-ish hours long, the audiobook.
Wow.
And it is a whirlwind of a story. The writing, of course, is impeccable. The story is just beyond. But also the narration by Laurence Fishburne, who's an actor. His narration is just... wow. I mean, we don't have a sample for you today, but if you can go sample it on Audible, right? It is incredible. And I think that just performative doesn't even begin to cut it for how well he's narrated this autobiography. So the thing is, Niz, and I'm not sure how much you can relate to this, but the thing is, I found this book, like I went into finding this book and wanting to read it because I was listening to a podcast. And in the podcast, just kind of as a throwaway, just as a quick reference, the guest on that pod said, and you know, if you want to hear it about Malcolm X, you should just go and read his autobiography. And I thought, ooh, okay, I'll do that. And it just kind of came to me that is how it happened. You know, we talk a lot about recommendations and such here on the show, but sometimes it just hits you like that, right? And you know me, Niz, for picking up books just because I heard a person talk about it on Book Talk and say something like, oh my gosh, this book made me so emotional, you have to read it. And I'm like, done deal, I will go read it now. Or on Now with Dave Brown, when Dave Brown says, this thing made me cry on a bench in the middle of public, you have to go read it. And I was like, absolutely, I will go read it now. So that's exactly what happened with this one. And I will say it has been a roller coaster ever since I picked it up. The book is quite good. And, you know, this, I guess I'll say parallel, but I don't want to be insensitive. But this parallel of reading Malcolm X's story, who fell into Islam, right? Like he became a Muslim. He preached Islam to Black Americans everywhere, New York and beyond. And somehow this falls into to my attention during Ramadan, which has been quite a read. So like I basically started this read at the start of Ramadan, and that was not planned for. I wasn't deliberately doing that, but it was quite interesting. So one of the reasons why I think, Nisreen, this book kind of sits so well with me, or I find it very intriguing to read about, is because I think a lot of people know of Malcolm X just as he is, right? Who he is, the kind of trouble, quote unquote, he's caused, and chaos he was part of. And of course, people know that he, started off as a non-Muslim, someone who grew up in the ghetto and then converted. But I don't think a lot of us actually know the nitty-gritty, or know like exactly the significance that he's had in society at that time during the 40s, 50s, 60s, but especially in the 60s during the like the Washington March and all of this.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to pick up a book and read all about him, read everything that he's gone through in his own words, about religion, about his journey, about the actual stuff he got into from a very young age, like birth and even beyond birth, I'd say, because he talked about his parents before he was born and such, and what kind of things he was born into. And I think that like it's one of these phenomenons where, oh yeah, I know this famous person, I know this influencer, this celebrity, or like this person of history, but do we really though? And I think that like oftentimes, you know, we go watch movies, we check out articles, or we just read up on people, but it's not the same as picking up the book. And especially if the book was written a while back. Like this is not released now, right? This was released even before he died.
Mm-hmm. This book, I really wanted to get into it for the longest time. And just you talking about it, like, I know, we all know how inspiring this man is. We all know he was a pretty amazing human rights activist. We all know the general facts, as you said, but we didn't know, like, specific details in his life, how he came to be, what his story was, what his parents' story was, where how he was raised. You know, there's so many details that made him who he is, made
Yes.
him who he was. So this is giving you, like, I really want to listen to the autobiography. Ever since you spoke about it a couple of days ago, I'm like, oh my God, this would be amazing to listen to, just because how prominent, how big of a figure he really is. And his storyline, he is such an inspiring person, not only to the Muslim community, not only to the Black community, but to so many people. And that's what's amazing. He doesn't just kind of line up with people within his community. You know what I mean? Like, everybody knows who he is. Everybody knows what he stood for. Everybody knows the general idea of Malcolm X, of who he is. So just how, like, as you said, the book kind of gets into the nitty-gritty of Malcolm X. I think that's what we need to hear.
Yeah, because we do know, right? Like, we know generally who he is and generally the impact that he's left on society during the years that he was alive and preaching, especially, and bringing communities together, building mosques. You know, a lot of North America was highly influenced by him. But at the same time, like, do we really, right? Like, that's the thing. And he talks a lot about his troubled days, his troubled past, but also dropping a lot of his troubled past. Like, there's a portion of his life, and this is like a semi-spoiler, but there's a portion of his life where he had to deal with the person that he was looking up to, his mentor, his who he called, like, the messenger of Islam. And there was a lot going on there where he struggled with the person that he looked up to now being someone that he couldn't, someone who had betrayed him, someone who, out of jealousy and other things, he had to remove. And his whole world, his whole identity of Islam, which first identity as a Muslim, which first started off with this person, with this mentor, with the guidance of this person, now had to be removed in order for him to continue still identifying as a Muslim. And that is he described it in such a deep way. And the way that he explained it, you know, you could really understand the struggle that he went through to continue to find his identity, to continue to hold on to faith, to continue to preach, but also be 100% genuine about what he was preaching about, right? So there's something, I think, like, in his character that he was trying to expose to us. And that includes when he was being dismissed, when he was being riled up, when he was being controversial, when so many people were turning against him, because that happened very dramatically and very quickly for him as well. And, you know, at the peak of all that, at the peak of all his troubles, how he had to turn to God, to himself, and find his way again, and know that there's, like, a line he says, Nisreen, where he says he'll never forget that the wings that he has now to fly high with, those wings were given by Allah. And that is because he was going through again hardship, again struggles. And this is a man who knows, you know, struggles, like he was stealing on the streets of Harlem, to say the least, could then find faith again, even when things were tough, when times were tough, when family, like, he didn't even know when he could get food on the table for family again. He didn't know if the community would continue supporting him if things got out about this other person. Like, there was so much going on, and he still felt that he had to find himself through faith. And those are details that you don't hear about.
And exactly. And he did. And I mean, this man, as you said, like, he went through so much. He went through so many hardships, no doubt about it. I mean, oh man, like, he was being accused of preaching racism just because he's Black.
Right.
He was accused of preaching and spreading violence just because he became a convert. He is a Muslim. So just kind of people labeling him as those things because of who he identifies, like how he identifies himself is unreal. And like, kind of going through all these hardships and still being able to kind of stand and be passionate and believe every word that you're saying and still preach. I can't imagine how strong he was. He just went through so much, but yet he still stood standing and still believed every word he was preaching, which is amazing.
And he had to.
Yeah.
He had to go through what he was going through as the personal journey, and then having people bind together. Like, that was his mission, right? To get Black Americans to bind together. And for him to do that, he had to believe in what he was preaching. And that's the kind of sentiment that he expresses through his book. And I'd say, like, there were moments where I felt very uncomfortable during this read, to say the least, you know, because he believed in what he believed in so severely, so like, there was nothing that would change his mind. Like, once he decided what Black Americans were going through and why they were going through it, there was nothing that could change his mind about that. And he felt that the only asylum was through Islam. And the way that he would portray that sometimes was so hard to sit with. And especially when he was talking about when he first started reading in prison, right? So he did well in school, then he dropped out and all of this other stuff. But then he went to prison and started reading. And, like, he would read day and night. He would lose sleep. He would read in little to no light. And he would read even after the guards were, you know, absolute about bedtime curfew. But he would read and read and read and read history and read biography and read philosophy and like, just everything that anyone had written on the subject of racism, of Black America, of white America, of whatever, all of this encompassed. And he kind of, like, talked us through it, if you will, you know, a montage of the kinds of things he was reading and learning and starting to stand for, and getting angry and getting frustrated and getting so, you know, like, the picture in his mind was being completely overturned. Like, he was going through a 180 of what he thought and lived to now, to what was happening as he was reading. And that was such a powerful few chapters. That was a very powerful portion of the book. I'd say a couple hours, where I was like, oh my gosh, where is this gonna go? Like, where is this gonna lead him, and what is he gonna do? Because you could tell there was almost like a monster coming out of him from that point. And I'd say that, like, I'm still reading, so, you know, he's now at his at the part of his journey where he's traveling to Mecca and facing some difficulties there, to say the least.
Yeah.
And that is quite interesting as well, because now he's meeting people from around the world, not just the Black Americans that he's been preaching to, right? So there are a lot of, like, ironic moments like that in the book that I'm very much, you know, curious about how he's going to navigate. But I have to go back before we wrap to say that Laurence Fishburne, quality narrator, A1. I cannot imagine anyone else doing this. I quite frankly don't even know how Malcolm X himself sounds, like what his voice sounds like in real life. But now it's always going to be the voice of Laurence for me because he does such an incredible job narrating the book. And we've talked often on this show about people's voices or portrayal of characters being ingrained in you. Movies, TV shows, whatever, right? It doesn't have to be audiobooks. But Nasreen, I'm telling you, there's nobody else who could have done a better job. Like, well, he's just fantastic.
First of all, it's Malcolm X autobiography. You need an amazing narrator for that. Yeah. So he did not disappoint.
No.
He did not disappoint.
Far from it. Far from it. It was fantastic. We're going to take a break now, and just the actual book is called The Autobiography of Malcolm X. Okay, so look for that if you're interested. We're going to take a break now, come back with Karoline Bourdeau. She's going to be put through rapid fire review, 5 books. She's going to go through super quick, and then we'll slow down and get right into them. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. Welcome back. It's AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. Nasreen and I holding down the fort this week, and we're checking in with an audiobook listener. We like to hang out with our community members here on the show and just get to books. We do this through a really fun game called RFR, Rapid Fire Review. It's steadily growing, of course, because it's in high demand. Please, email us if you want to participate in Rapid Fire Review. But in the meantime, Karoline Bourdeau, who actually, it's not her first time coming here. She was one of our first guests here on the show, definitely first season. So throwback guest and an avid book reader. Karoline, it's nice to have you back on.
Thank you.
And you actually recommended to us reads that we've reviewed together on Kelly and Ramya back in the day as well. So we know that you've got interesting reads up your sleeve. And the best way that we found to get to those books is by doing rapid fire review. So we're putting you through the paces. You get 15 seconds on the clock with an actual timer to review a book in whatever way you want. And we'll get through 5 books. And then we'll expand on some of them afterwards, right?
Great.
Okay. So these are books you gave us, so you don't get to go through the reviews of books I picked, thank goodness. But let's start with the first one. Is you ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. The first book is Fifth Business by Robertson Davies.
Okay, Robertson Davies is a Kingston writer, author, and he is no longer with us. He wrote a whole series that started with Fifth Business. It was a book that I read in high school.
Oh, that's a good place to end. You read this in high school, but you still wanted to recommend it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We'll have to pause there for the teaser, but now you know what 15 seconds feels like, Karoline.
I'll talk much faster.
Okay, exactly. We got to know about Robertson, though. All right, here we go. Maybe we'll expand on that book later. Here is the second book, The Help by Catherine Stockett.
This book I read about 10 years ago, or when it first came out, and it is about racism and how it depends on your influences as to how open you are, and
open you are and
willing to learn.
Oh, okay. All right. That was The Help. I'm very curious about that. Was that her? Do you know if there are other books that
I
she's
think that
written?
was her main one. I don't know if she's written any others. I haven't done.
Okay.
I haven't taken a look, but if she did, I want to read them.
Okay. All right. Curious about that one too.
Mm-hmm.
Third in line, The Door-to-Door Bookstore by Carson Sebastian.
Very sweet book about a man who used to sell books at a store, and the daughter of the owner tries to push him out, and the adventures they have in that push and pull.
Oh, that's it. Oh, wow. Oh, you did really well. You did really well. Okay, I love the title of that one, and I'm very curious about it as well. We might have to expand on more than one book here. The next one, if the title doesn't get you, then maybe this review from you will. It's called Halal Sex: The Intimate Lives of Muslim Women in North America by Shaima Benambarak.
You said it right. This book was a surprise to me, and I just love it. It really reset my thinking. It's about how Muslim women choose to not just follow tradition, but choose to go their own way with their own bodies and sexuality.
Okay. And this last one, ever since you gave it to us, Karoline, I've been thinking about who first recommended this book or put it in my radar, but I can't remember, and I'm very curious. It's called When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi.
Yeah. This book was really sweet and very sad to read. It's about a medical student who wonders about how his patients with cancer do it, and then the tables turn and he becomes the patient with cancer.
Oh my. Okay. All right. Let's start. Where do you want to begin? Which book do you want to expand on?
I love them all, so I'll leave that up to you.
Oh, I get to choose. Okay. Let's start with Halal Sex.
Okay.
Yes, I want to know.
Yeah, right. Both Nisreen and I were like, eyebrows raised. What could this mean?
And then you pointed to me the timing of my talking about this book too. Oops.
Yes, because we are in the midst of Ramadan right now for Muslims around the world observing Ramadan. So tell us more about this. It's called Halal Sex: The Intimate Lives of North American Women. Of Muslim Women in North America by Shaima Benambarak. And when did you read this one?
I read this one, I'm going to say a couple of months ago. And I'm always interested in gender equality books. I do have a degree in women's studies, and so I always keep an eye out for interesting and different opinions. So when I came across this title, my brain hurt. And I put it down and walked away, and then I came back and I read it, and I read it in like 2 or 3 days. It was a really fast read for me. Basically, this author did some research about how Muslim women treat sexuality, and they turned out they don't want to marry the first person that their parents recommend. And they haven't met anyone that they want to be with forever. And they didn't want to just get married to have sex and then, you know. So they went their own way, and they basically decided that they were going to just do whatever feels right to them. And she spoke to women of all ages. There was a teenager, there were university students, there were older women. She spoke to many, many women about this in her course of research. And I just loved all the stories. I loved the reactions from some of the families. There was one woman whose mother was so supportive, she went out and bought her condoms.
Oh,
wow.
Yes. There was another woman whose family took some time to figure it out, and they were supportive eventually. There are women who experienced the reverse, where their families just did not want to hear about it, didn't want to know. In some cases, they said, "Don't tell us, we don't know, la la la."
Right. Oh, like
Yeah,
Hear
I
no evil,
understand.
Yes, exactly.
And I found the stories really interesting. And I found also the stories about how this influenced their marriages later on for those that got married. And they said that in their own opinions, their marriages are much happier than those of their siblings, because they actually didn't just marry because they were told to.
So, real basic question here. Was it really about going out for all these women who were subject to the research? Was it really about going out and having sex before marriage? Or was it really like more generalized than that in terms of dating, trying out different relationships, just kind of headed out into the world of relationships before getting settled down and or an arranged marriage?
I think it was a bit of both. Certainly, there were some of them that they would just like, I want it, I'm going to go out and get it, and that's how it is. And some of them were rejecting the idea of arranged marriage, and wanted to go, to find a relationship that they wanted to be in, or relationships that they wanted to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And there was also one woman who is a lesbian, and that was also covered in the research, that she had to deal with her family's opinions about being liberal, and then about being a lesbian, and then being, going out and just meeting people and having sex at her own leisure, basically.
Right, right. And this author, Shaima, did she interview women? You mentioned all ages and different situations and tradition levels, I guess, or different levels of
Yeah.
Orthodox in Islam. But how about geographically?
They were all over North America.
Okay.
She interviewed people in Montreal. There were people in New York, Chicago, Texas. That one shocked me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because like Texas is very conservative to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and then add these two elements of being Muslim, and then, wanting to be liberal and wanting to basically have control over their own bodies.
Were you hearing some stories of resentment, or were they all kind of supposed to be success stories?
No, there was a bit of everything.
Okay.
There were some there was one woman, for example, that had an arranged marriage and left it. Um,
So
and
divorcee.
divorcee, yeah. And she did not want to marry again, and decided to live with somebody for a while. So that it was a range of different emotions and different people in different life stages.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds very fascinating, especially because of the research aspect. What, if you know, about the author made it okay for her to write something like this? Did she talk about
I
her own fascinations and interest in the subject?
She doesn't talk a lot about herself, but she does talk about how she actually was really involved with the women that she spoke to. It wasn't just an interview. She actually spent time with them, got to know them. Says some of them are her friends, and she wanted to be really, really careful with the stories, to represent them in the best way that she knew
Mm,
how. Um, and it sounded to me, from one of the things she said, I think, that she herself made those choices as well.
interesting. But she didn't get into too much personal detail of her own
No,
stories? Okay.
no,
Okay. But it was informed journalism, it sounds.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. I mean, of course, like now there's a lot of transparency and let's just say less stigma around women talking about sex, whether it be
Hmm.
personal or just, informative or everything else in between, right? Like you can
Yeah.
find all over social media lots of different hashtags and compartments of the world where women are comparing notes, chatting, just
Yeah.
really, openly. But there's always some level of restriction still, like whether we're talking tradition or religion or
Hmm.
cultural norms in a lot of places around the world where women are still not. It's very taboo to talk
Hmm.
about sex and
Yeah.
especially about your own experiences.
Oh, it's definitely a
Right.
taboo topic in all directions.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
it's very difficult to not just talk about it in general, but to talk to your parents about it. I mean,
Oh my gosh,
Hmm.
yeah.
I really am curious about all their reactions, whether it's positive or negative. It's I think for any parent, whether you're Muslim, Christian, whatever it may
Yeah.
be, I think any parent, it would be a very difficult topic to talk about with your child. And not just an adult, but if it's a teenager,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about it future perspective. I don't know how I would come into conversation with my daughter or son to talk about this type of topic, because it's a we I don't know how to say this, but we were always told these are taboo topics to talk about.
Yeah, like you
So
don't talk about these things.
we're not
No,
used to it.
no.
We're not used to kind of having this open conversation. This is how we're supposed to have sex. This is how you're supposed to uh get married. This is how you're supposed to date. And just kind of go in different directions, because as you mentioned, this is not about religion. This is about tradition, traditional, cultural aspect. And some people are taking a different direction. Like, I'm Muslim, and I take it in a different direction than other people who are more religious, more traditional. Like, when you're born, it's written for you that there's a person in like a family friend. Okay, you're supposed to be with this person.
Like an
That's
arrangement written for
an
you.
arrangement written for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And like, these are, old mentalities, traditional back then. So it has nothing to do with our religion, and people take it into that aspect. But nonetheless, I think a lot of people kind of misunderstand that topic and like mislead this conversation, because they get confused of cultural, religious, and traditional.
That's fair. That's very
It
fair.
is totally, no,
Yeah.
that's totally true. I mean, I grew up in the Middle East. We are Greek Orthodox, and yet there were lots of traditions taken from the culture, which aren't really necessarily prescribed by Christianity, but we still did it anyway, nonetheless, because that's just what they know.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Karoline, like, and Nisreen, as you said as well, where a lot of things seem to overlap. Sometimes tradition, culture, religion. I'd say tradition and or culture and religion overlap. In a lot of places, and we know this, like there's evidence of this everywhere, right? Where you kind of can compare notes and say, oh, this is something that, someone who was practicing Hinduism and someone who is practicing Islam can relate to. And that's just because of geography, because of years and years of overlapping communities, et cetera, et cetera. But what I wanted to hone in on quickly, Niz, is what you said about, bringing these topics up to your parents, right? And kind of pushing against a boundary, if you will. And that is the rebellion side of it. And I think that perhaps that's the shared thread in this book, Halal Sex, of all the stories of these women, is they're really like, I know that this is not going to be taken well, or this is not the norm, or, right? Because regardless of how old some of these traditions may be, there are very much a lot of upheld traditions, and especially in a family dynamic, parents will raise children with these practices, and that's what you grew up with. That's what you're supposed to carry forward to the next generation, and this has been happening for generations and generations and generations. So then for somebody to say, actually, I'm not going to do that anymore, is humongous. Even the tiniest thing, like, no, I'm not gonna have an arranged marriage. Mom and dad, sorry, I'm gonna go find my own partner. Like, I mean, you're not even telling them you're gonna have sex before marriage. This is just you saying,
not at all.
yeah. But this would be like an absurdity in certain families, right? Like, we don't even have to be as broad
It was
as to say
in
culture.
mine. Like,
Right.
yeah, just that was a big no-no. And I was the first of my siblings and cousins, and
The
I
first
said there will be. Sorry?
the first to get married, or like to
Yeah,
come of
and
age
to
to get
make
married.
that choice that
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
not going to go with an arranged marriage. In fact,
Oh, wow.
when I was told, well, you have to come to church and maybe you'll meet some people, I basically said no.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. And so you can
That
kind
did
of,
not go well.
I know. So this topic hits home for you in
Well,
some
totally.
sense.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I would love to get to another book with you. So just to reiterate, this one is Halal Sex, which, by the way, like the title itself, I think serves a lot because
Yeah.
when you think of sex, as it pertains to Islam,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
there is halal and haram, right? Like there
Yes.
is
Yes, of course.
the what
Yeah.
is allowed and what isn't in the religious practices. So the way that they're kind of already hinting at this potentially not
Yeah.
being what you consider halal
Yeah.
sex is quite
I
interesting.
would pick this book up right away.
Yeah, it's intelligent. So Halal Sex, The Intimate Lives of Muslim Women in North America by Shaima Ben Mbarak. What's another book? So I picked the first one. What's the second one you want to expand on, Caroline?
Nazreen, do you have a favorite? I love them all.
I want you to expand on the what's it called? The five.
Oh, Fifth Business?
Yeah,
Yeah.
by Robertson Davies. This is the one you read in high school, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us why it
So
sticks with you.
it that's the first of a series, and it's funny because I remember all of them. Um, one of the things that that stuck with me is the very beginning of the book. It's a snowball that hits someone, injures them, and then it goes off from there. Um, and you just have no idea what that injury will do to whole communities, right? It's like a trickle effect. What I remember about it is that it was so well written. You just
Mm.
wanted to keep reading. There was so much to pull out as well, literary wise, and again, traditions and society, and all kinds of things that you look at. And it just carried on. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is amazing to learn more about. So,
Mm. Characters? Did characters stick with you?
um, yes, they did. I unfortunately cannot remember names. I should
Right.
have looked this up, but
Oh,
I
that's
just
okay.
didn't.
But
I wanted
why?
to go with it the way it is, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this is what I remember. Um, but it was a little boy that threw the snowball, and it was a woman that got hit, um, and it talks about, it goes on from the school to the neighborhood to everything. The characters, some of them were quirky, some of them were funny, some of them were very serious,
Mm.
and it was a big mix.
Do you think there's a reason why this stuck with you from when you read it in high school? Like if you had read it maybe at a different stage in life, it wouldn't have hit the same?
I don't really know. I think what really stayed with me is the trickle effect of everything we do.
Hmm. The chain.
Yes,
Right.
I think that's what really stayed with me is the chain. Like it makes you think everything I say or do, even if it's not consequential today,
Mm-hmm.
may come back.
That's quite an interesting observation, especially because um, now we live in a world where the impact that we have could literally be just a like or a comment on a social
Yeah,
media post, right? Like we're not
right.
even just having direct in-person conversations with our neighbors and our families and our friends that we're going to go see. Like we are able to text and then ghost somebody. We're able to,
Yeah, yeah,
meet people from around the world, let's say on an
right.
online dating site, and then
Mm-hmm.
drop a
Hmm.
relationship. Like dynamics are so fickle, and yet you still think that it holds true, like what you said?
I think it does because you ghost someone, then 5 years later you meet someone else, and whoops, they're like the best friend of the person you ghosted.
Yeah, yeah. It could be that direct. You're right.
Yeah, I'm sure it's happened. It hasn't happened to me, thankfully, but um, I think it doesn't really matter. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I don't know why, but I keep thinking of karma as
Yes.
the
Yeah.
as the result of this conversation of thinking, yes, the conclusion is karma, and
Yeah.
that's a total just like effect of how you're describing it, and not just necessarily talking about karma. But yeah, it's this
Mhm.
effect that what goes around comes around, or that you
Yeah.
will eventually face the consequences of an interaction, even if you think
Right.
you
Yeah, at the end
don't.
of the day,
Yeah.
it's gonna come and bite you in the
Okay,
Well,
you're
or
done
it
with
could
karma for
happen the
sure.
other way too. I met someone recently that I did not remember, but I spoke to her at a conference. And I had said that I was in law school, and she had a little girl, and the little girl went to law school, who
Mhm.
is also vision impaired. So you just don't know where your words are going to land.
Right. Oh yeah, that's true too, right? Like you definitely have even if you don't necessarily keep in touch with someone anymore, something
Mm,
that someone said to you 10 years ago could be the reason why you're in this career now, why you're on this path now, why
yeah,
you are the way you
exactly.
are today, right?
Yeah, you
So
just
many
don't know.
people. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Have you ever tried to get back in touch with someone that you've lost touch with? Like I had a teacher, I'll tell you why I asked that. I had a teacher in grade 8 who I just adored. But
Hmm.
at that time, like, there's no social media. Wasn't
Yeah,
even
yeah, yeah.
Facebook or emails yet.
Yep.
But then I tried, like, she left such an impact on me, and just, the confidence I have for so many things was because of everything she explicitly taught me. And so later on, I try to find her for years, and I still am not able to. So I guess she's just like a social media ghost. But,
Yeah.
and I've even revisited my school several times, but she stopped teaching there. So there's no way for me to get back in touch with her, but it's just that yearning that I have, that I wish I could tell
Mm.
you how much you've influenced me and how grateful I am for
Aw,
how you've taught me. I know it's really it goes deep for me.
I love that.
How about for you? Either of
So
you.
I did that. Um, there was a woman who, when I first moved to Montreal, an older lady, she was at the Montreal Association for the Blind. She took so much time with me,
Mhm.
and gave me so much in the same, like confidence, information, language. Um, about 15 years ago, I want to say now, I reached out to her and I found her,
Oh, wow.
and she came to visit me and got to see my house at the time, and got to meet my husband and my dog, and we went out to dinner, and it was such an amazing
Yeah.
day. Like I heard recently that she's passed, but
Mm.
still
But
I
you got to
I am so
reconnect.
happy that I got to say thank you.
Yes. Yes, that is so beautiful. And then, like, as per this book, we have the opposite reactions, right? Things that we
Yeah,
could take back,
yes,
or
totally.
go back in
Yeah,
time and say, I'm so sorry, but this person does not exist in our lives anymore.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
just our stuff to
It's
carry.
really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I really do want to get one more quick shot from you about When Breath Becomes Air.
Yes.
Please
Yes.
just tell us what about this book makes it so brilliant.
It is so well narrated. It's so well written. The author didn't write the whole thing. His wife wrote some of it because he was gone when she had to finish it.
So this is a nonfiction
It's totally
title.
nonfiction.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and it's told so beautifully. One of the scenes that I still remember is when he found out that he's terminal. Um, and he had young kids at the time. And basically, they said, we're going to do everything as normally as possible for as long as we can.
Mm,
And they took the kids to the park. They watched movies with them. They cuddled. They did everything they could, right up until like the time he had to go into hospice.
wow.
And he chose how to die as well.
Oh,
Like,
did he? Okay, so he
yeah,
planned it through knowing
yes.
his condition. Do you know when in his journey he started writing the book?
When he was starting to be ill, and he actually was dictating it.
Hmm. Oh, wow. And this
Hmm.
book was released in 2016, so it's quite recent.
Yeah.
I think that like books like this definitely leave a mark. But Caroline, you're known for reading heavy, heavy books. Not that you only read heavy books, but I think like
No.
no, but on our like during our book club meetings with Amir Khan once a month, you know, whenever there are books, sometimes some of us are a little squeamish to be like, I don't know if I'll pick this up because you know it seems way too much for me. Whereas like there were several books that we had that were heavy, but some of us really like we tried our best to articulate how it felt to read a
Yes.
book so deep, so
Mm-hmm.
meaningful,
Yeah.
so challenging and difficult
Hmm.
as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the heavy books.
Do you?
Yeah. Like there are sometimes where I want to read like breezy, cozy,
Yeah.
simple
Totally.
books that I just don't want to overthink about.
Mhm.
But when
The
it comes to
door-to-door
like
bookstore.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, when it comes to the heavy books that Caroline mentions, it just
Sorry.
there's no you're like it there's so much conversation that you could talk about.
Yeah.
Like there's a
Hmm.
heavy load of conversations you can chat about. Like I wanted to keep going about the these book titles that you mentioned. I wish we had more time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I was just going to say that and sometimes like these topics that are you know so uncomfortable, so
Mhm.
painful because
Hmm.
maybe you've had personal experience or know people like you know who've gone through the conditions that these books are exploring. And of course we know how difficult it is for the authors as well to write these books.
Right.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
another one we read a while back about a young woman who was going through cancer is about her changes in
Yes.
wigs. Was that you who recommended that, Caroline?
Yeah. That was it. 5 wigs.
Or
Five
something. Yes, I think that's what it was called.
or
And
9 wigs. Sorry. Something like.
9 wigs,
Yes.
and it was like her personalities being showcased through these wigs, and how her journey through
Mhm.
cancer really changed her life, and she didn't know she would make it through, and she was very young as well.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
but that was a tough read. That was a really
It was
tough
a
read.
tough read, but it was such a happy
Yes, it
read at
was.
times too, and it
Yes,
was fun at times.
exactly, because the way she wrote it was to lend people that laughter and good
Yes.
spirits through her journey as well.
Yeah.
But you know, you could see the hardship coming through.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, and
See, I feel like you need tough reads to challenge yourself.
to challenge ourselves to help us understand that you know our reality is not the only one. There's so much
Hmm.
going on right now around the world. We don't need to look far to know that.
Yeah.
Caroline, thank you. Like this has been such a wonderful conversation. It's lovely to have you back on, and we know because of the book club that every book conversation with you is a good one. So
Thank you.
thank you, and we'll surely have you back on again.
Thanks.
Okay, take care. We
You
were
too.
speaking with Karoline Bourdeau, an avid audiobook listener and reader, and we love to have people from the community join us to recommend books through rapid fire review or other means of conversation, of course. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again next week. Jacob Szymanski will be back. Nisreen Abdelmajid will be back. I will be back. I'm Ramia Amuddin. And until next time, happy audiobook listening.